The biting cold of the Rocky Mountains shows no mercy to the weak. When winter arrives, only the strongest survive. But sometimes, survival doesn't depend solely on strength. It depends on being in the right place at the right time. This is the story of three souls who found each other when all seemed lost. A dog with fur as black as night, scarred by the pain of loss. Two small wild lynxes, abandoned by the cruel fate of the mountains. Together, they defied all the rules of nature and proved that love knows no species, understands no limits, and doesn't need blood to be real. What you are about to discover will completely change your understanding of family, sacrifice, and the impossible bonds that sometimes form in the most unlikely places in the wild. The snow was falling in thick flakes that November morning when Sarah awoke to a silence that weighed like lead. Her cabin, isolated nearly 3,000 meters high in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, used to be her perfect refuge. But for the past 10 days, that place had become a monument to grief. Luna, her 5-year-old golden retriever, lay in the corner of the room, in the same spot where she had given birth to 6 beautiful puppies just 3 weeks ago. Now, that space was empty. The viral infection arrived quickly and silently, taking 1 puppy a day until none remained. Sarah was a veterinarian. She had dedicated 30 years of her life to saving animals. But she couldn't save her own canine grandchildren. The irony was too cruel to bear. Luna hadn't eaten properly for days. Her milk still leaked, staining her golden fur, constantly reminding her of what she had lost. The dog spent hours staring at the empty box where her babies used to sleep, whimpering softly, searching for something that would never return. Sarah tried to comfort her, but how could she comfort a mother who had lost everything? That particular morning, Sarah decided they needed to get out. Staying inside the cabin was suffocating them both. She put on her heaviest thermal coat, attached a leash to Luna, something she rarely did, as the dog was extremely well trained, and they set off onto the trail that snaked along the mountainside. The wind howled through the snow-laden pines, and the gray sky threatened another storm. Luna walked slowly, lacking the enthusiasm she usually displayed during her mountain adventures. They were about 1 kilometer from the cabin when Luna stopped abruptly. Her ears perked up, her whole body tensed. Sarah recognized that posture. Luna had sensed something. Before Sarah could react, the dog darted toward a snow-covered rock formation, pulling on the leash with a force Sarah hadn't seen in weeks. "Luna, wait!" Sarah yelled, but the dog didn't obey. Something stronger than training had taken hold of her. When Sarah finally caught up with Luna, breathless from the high-altitude run, she found her dog standing before a small hollow among the rocks. And then she heard it, a sound that made her heart stop. It was meowing. Not the meowing of domestic cats. It was higher-pitched, more desperate, laden with a wild urgency that comes only from the pure instinct for survival. Sarah knelt carefully in the snow and peered into the dark crevice. 2 pairs of enormous blue eyes stared back at her, reflecting the faint morning light. Lynx cubs, alone, freezing, dying. Sarah wasted no time analyzing the situation. Her veterinarian training kicked in instantly. She pulled out her backpack and carefully slipped her gloved hands into the cavity. The puppies tried to recoil, but they were too weak to run very far. She managed to grab the first one, a small female, no bigger than the palm of her hand, with spotted fur already visible beneath her baby down. The second puppy, also female, was even weaker, her body barely responding to touch. Sarah wrapped them in her own thermal jacket, pressing them against her chest to share body heat. That's when Luna did something extraordinary. The large golden retriever approached Sarah and began sniffing the puppies with an intensity bordering on obsession. Her nose worked rapidly, investigating every inch of the tiny, trembling bodies. Sarah watched, fascinated and a little worried. Luna had never shown any interest in wild animals before. In fact, she usually kept a respectful distance from anything that wasn't human or canine. But something was different now. Something had profoundly changed within that grieving mother. The lynx cubs reacted with instinctive fear to the enormous snout approaching. They tried to cower even further against Sarah's chest, emitting small sounds of protest that were simultaneously terrifying and pathetic coming from such tiny creatures. But Luna showed no aggression. Her movements were cautious, almost reverent. She sniffed each cub thoroughly and then did something that left Sarah speechless. She began to lick them. Her large pink tongue ran over their mottled faces, cleaning away the dirt and cold just as she would with her own cubs. Sarah knew she needed to get them home immediately. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and another snowstorm was approaching from the west. She could feel it in the air and see it in the dark clouds gathering over the distant peaks. She tucked the two puppies inside her jacket, zipping it up just enough to keep them safe, but still allow for ventilation. Luna stayed glued to Sarah's side the entire walk back, occasionally standing on her hind legs to sniff the jacket where the puppies were hiding, whimpering softly whenever they made a sound. The cabin had never seemed so welcoming. Sarah rushed inside, kicking the snow off her boots and running to prepare an emergency space. She had kept all the canine neonatal equipment from Luna's litter: cooler box, heating pads, special bottles, thermometers. She never imagined she would use all of it again so soon, and certainly not for wild lynxes. She set the heating pad to a low temperature and lined the box with soft blankets, creating a safe and warm nest. When Sarah finally placed the two cubs in the prepared box, she could properly examine them for the first time. Both were females, probably 3 or 4 weeks old. Their eyes had already changed from baby blue to a greenish amber hue that shone with wild intelligence even through their weakness. Their characteristic lynx ears, with tufts of fur at the tips, were already visible, though still small and disproportionate. Their paws were enormous compared to their bodies, promising the size they would reach as adults. The markings on their fur were different. One had darker, more defined markings, the other had softer, more spaced-out patterns. The larger of the two, the one with the bolder spots, tried to stand when Sarah placed her in the box. Her wobbly legs barely supported her, but there was determination in her movements. The smaller ones simply fell to the side, too exhausted even to explore. Sarah checked their vital signs with experienced hands. Dangerously low body temperature, severe dehydration, clear signs of prolonged starvation. They were alive, but barely. Sarah estimated they had gone at most 12 to 24 hours without food, possibly longer. Where was their mother? Sarah looked out the window at the storm beginning outside. An avalanche, probably, or a mountain lion, or simply the brutal mountain winter taking its toll as it always did. That's when Luna made a decision. Without any command or encouragement, the golden retriever simply entered the cooler. She moved carefully, as if carrying crystal, and lay down around the two lynx cubs. Her large, warm body formed a protective barrier, and before Sarah could process what was happening, Luna began nudging the cubs toward her belly with her snout. The cubs, operating purely on instinct, began searching for milk, and Luna let them. More than that, she encouraged them, gently licking them, positioning her body to facilitate access. Sarah watched with tears in her eyes as two wild predators began to nurse from a domestic dog, and that dog finally stopped searching for the pups she had lost. The first 48 hours were the most critical. Sarah barely slept, alternating between monitoring the cubs' vital signs and preparing specialized formula to supplement Luna's milk. She had called a fellow veterinarian specializing in wildlife as soon as she had cell phone signal, something rare and intermittent at her altitude, and received specific guidance on nutrition for newborn lynx. The formula needed to be rich in protein and fat, much more so than any formula for domestic kittens. Sarah carefully mixed the ingredients every 4 hours, warming them to the exact body temperature before feeding them. The larger pup accepted the bottle almost immediately, grasping the silicone nipple with her tiny paws and sucking with surprising force. Sarah named her Maya, a name that meant illusion or magic, because it seemed impossible that this wild little creature was there, alive, fighting with such determination. The smaller one was more difficult. She refused to take the bottle, turning her head away and making small sounds of protest. Sarah had to feed her drop by drop using a syringe, a tedious process that took almost an hour per feeding. She named her Sierra, after the mountains that almost killed them, but also brought them together. Luna watched each feeding with intense attention. Whenever Sarah picked up one of the puppies to feed, the dog immediately became alert, raising her head and following every movement. If one of the puppies whimpered or seemed uncomfortable, Luna would whimper in response, clearly distressed. Sarah quickly realized that it was best to hold the feedings near the cooler, where Luna could see and smell the puppies at all times. This kept the dog calm and, surprisingly, also kept the puppies more cooperative, as if her presence was comforting. On the third day, something changed in Sierra. Sarah was preparing the morning food when she heard Luna make a different sound, not a whimper of distress, but something softer, almost like a canine purr. She rushed to the counter and found Sierra finally trying to stand on her own. The little lynx was wobbly, her legs still weak, but there was a new light in her amber-green eyes. When Sarah offered the bottle this time, Sierra grabbed it and began to suck vigorously, as if she had finally decided that life was worth the effort. With both cubs feeding properly and gaining strength, Sarah was able to observe more closely the extraordinary dynamic developing between Luna and the lynxes. The dog not only provided warmth and milk, she was actively mothering the wild cubs. She constantly cleaned them, her tongue running over every inch of their small bodies in grooming sessions that lasted 20 minutes or more. She repositioned them when they seemed uncomfortable, using her snout to gently nudge them into better positions. She even responded to their different cries. A high-pitched meow meant hunger, a lower one meant cold, a trembling one meant fear. Maya was clearly the explorer. By the 5th day, she was already trying to climb the walls of the cooler, her tiny but sharp claws gripping the blankets as she attempted to pull herself up. She was the first to investigate any new sound, the first to react when Sarah entered the room, the first to try new things. Her eyes followed everything with focused intensity, already demonstrating the hunting instincts that would one day make her a formidable predator. When Luna moved, Maya observed every detail, as if studying and memorizing the large dog's movement patterns. Sierra was different. She was observant, cautious, thoughtful in ways that seemed impossible for such a young creature. She didn't rush into exploring. First, she watched Maya try something, assessed the result, and then decided if it was worth doing the same. She was quieter than her sister, conserving energy, seemingly understanding instinctively that in the wild mountains efficiency meant survival. But there was a tenderness in her too. She was the one who stayed closest to Luna, often falling asleep with her little head resting on the dog's paw, purring softly, a surprisingly loud sound coming from such a small body. Luna treated both with equal devotion, but Sarah noticed that the dog adapted her behavior to each personality. With Maya, Luna was more vigilant, always ready to intervene when the adventurous pup got into potentially dangerous situations. With Sierra, Luna was more encouraging, gently nudging the shy pup to explore, to move, to interact. It was as if Luna instinctively understood that each needed something different from her. Sarah documented everything in her diary, knowing she was witnessing something that defied simple scientific explanations. This wasn't just misguided maternal instinct, it was conscious choice, intelligent adaptation, genuine love crossing the species barrier. The first time the lynx cubs emerged from their cooler was an event Sarah would never forget. It was early December, and they were about 6 weeks old. Maya had finally managed to climb over the edge of the cooler after days of determined attempts and fell to the other side with a dull thud onto the wooden floor. The sound made Luna jump up from where she was lying near the fireplace, immediately running to investigate. Sarah held her breath, expecting to see Maya hurt or frightened. Instead, the little lynx stood up, shook herself dramatically as if nothing had happened, and began exploring the living room with wobbly but determined steps. Luna followed her like a giant golden shadow. Whenever Maya approached something potentially dangerous, the warm fireplace, the stairs leading to the second floor, the door leading outside, Luna gently blocked her path with her body. She wasn't aggressive or controlling, just protective. Maya reacted to these interventions with a mixture of frustration and acceptance, sometimes trying to circumvent Luna's barrier, other times simply changing direction to explore something different. It was a fascinating dance of boundaries and mutual respect, with Luna setting the rules and Maya constantly testing them. Sierra took 3 more days to gather the courage to follow her sister out of the crate. When she finally did, it was in a completely different way. Instead of climbing and falling, she waited until Luna was nearby, meowed loudly until she got the dog's attention, and then stretched her paws upwards in a clear plea for help. Luna, demonstrating surprising understanding, carefully picked Sierra up by the scruff of the neck, just as a lynx mother would, and gently placed her on the ground next to Maya. It was at that moment that Sarah realized Luna wasn't just improvising based on canine instincts, she was learning to be a lynx mother. With both pups now mobile and actively exploring, the cabin had become a constant adventure zone. Maya discovered she could climb practically anything: curtains, bookshelves, Sarah's old leather sofa, even Sarah's own legs when she was distracted. Her claws were incredibly sharp for such a young creature, and Sarah quickly learned to wear thick pants indoors. Sierra was more selective in her climbs, preferring to observe from strategic high points. She claimed the lowest shelf of the bookcase as her personal territory, from where she could see the entire room without being in the thick of the action. Mealtimes became chaotic events. Sarah was still supplementing breastfeeding with formula, but she began introducing solid foods as the puppies developed teeth. She prepared a mixture of finely chopped raw meat, venison she had hunted herself and frozen for the winter, with the formula. The first time she offered this mixture, Maya plunged her entire face into the bowl, emerging with her snout completely covered in meat and blood, looking absolutely delighted with herself. Sierra was more meticulous, using her rough tongue to lick small portions, carefully tasting before deciding what was acceptable. Luna watched these meals with an expression that Sarah could only describe as maternal pride mixed with slight bewilderment. The dog clearly recognized that these were no normal puppies. Her adopted daughters ate raw meat with an enthusiasm no puppy would show, made sounds that weren't barks or whimpers, moved in ways that defied canine physics. But Luna never showed rejection or confusion that would make her recoil. Instead, she seemed fascinated by the differences, attentively observing each new behavior as if cataloging important information. It was during one of these observations that Luna began to teach. Maya was trying to hunt a ball of yarn that had rolled under the sofa. She crouched down, her little rear end sticking up in the air, her short tail wagging furiously, preparing to pounce. But her positioning was all wrong, too exposed, too noisy, too obvious. Luna approached and, to Sarah's utter astonishment, physically demonstrated the correct posture. The dog crouched down beside Maya, her belly almost touching the floor, moving in absolute silence, every muscle controlled. Maya stopped and watched. Then she tried to copy. Her second attack was significantly better, lower, quieter, more efficient. Sarah realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. Luna was teaching feline hunting techniques. How could a dog do that? The only explanation was that Luna was observing the pups, identifying what they were instinctively trying to do, and helping to refine those instincts. It was interspecies learning flowing in both directions. The lynxes learning from a dog how to be patient and careful, and the dog learning from feline instincts how to teach predation. Night fell early at that altitude during winter, and with the darkness came the biting cold that made the mountains deadly. But inside the cabin, illuminated by the crackling fireplace, an unlikely family gathered.
Luna lay in her favorite spot near the fire, and Maya and Sierra snuggled against her warm body, purring in a duet that sounded like little engines. Sarah sat in her reading chair, watching the three sleep, and wondered how long it could last.
Winter in the Rocky Mountains was relentless, but inside Sarah's cabin, life flourished in unexpected ways. By the time the lynx cubs were 2 months old, their personalities were fully formed, and their differences became more evident each day. Maya had become a miniature force of nature. She climbed to the top of the exposed beams in the cabin ceiling, leaped from piece of furniture to piece of furniture with impressive precision, and constantly tested the limits of what was possible for a feline body. Her dark spots had become even more pronounced, creating dramatic patterns that perfectly matched her bold personality. Sierra developed an observant intelligence that often surprised Sarah. The little lynx would spend long periods simply watching, observing how Sarah prepared meals, how Luna reacted to different situations, how the snow fell outside the window. Then, when she finally decided to act, her movements were precise and efficient, as if she had mentally rehearsed everything beforehand. Her softer spots gave her an almost ethereal appearance, especially when the firelight danced on her silvery fur. She was smaller than Maya, but there was a quiet strength in her that promised shrewd survival when the time came. Luna had completely transformed. The grieving and depressed dog Sarah had met weeks ago was gone, replaced by a vigilant and devoted mother who didn't leave her adopted daughters out of sight for more than a few minutes. She had developed an elaborate system of communication with the lynxes. Different tones of barks meant different warnings, certain tail movements indicated approval or disapproval, ear positioning signaled when it was safe to explore or time to retreat. The cubs responded to these signals with an understanding that defied logical explanation, as if they were learning a hybrid language that should never have existed. Sarah began documenting her interactions more seriously, filming with her phone whenever something noteworthy happened, and noteworthy things happened constantly. There was the morning Maya got stuck on top of the tallest shelf and couldn't get down, meowing desperately until Luna dragged Sarah's wooden stool to the base of the shelf, creating a makeshift ladder. There was the afternoon Sierra hunted and killed her first rat that had invaded the cabin during a snowstorm. Luna watched the whole event without interfering, and when Sierra proudly brought her prey to the dog, Luna inspected it carefully before giving a small bark of approval. The three of them were constantly playing together. Maya loved to ambush Luna, hiding behind furniture or in dark corners, waiting until the dog passed by unsuspecting before pouncing on her tail or ears. Luna would feign surprise every time, spinning dramatically and chasing the little lynx in circles around the cabin until Maya collapsed in giggling exhaustion. Sierra preferred more subtle games. She would steal Luna's toys and hide them in increasingly creative places, turning each day into a treasure hunt. Luna always found them, of course, her canine nose overpowering any feline attempt to conceal scents, but she seemed to enjoy the challenge. But it wasn't all play. Sarah noticed that Luna was actively teaching the cubs about real dangers. When the firewood in the fireplace crackled and sent sparks flying, Luna immediately positioned her body between the fire and the cubs, firmly pushing them back until the danger passed. When thunder rumbled through the mountains, rare but terrifying in winter, Luna gathered both cubs under her body and remained still and calm, teaching them that frightening noises didn't necessarily mean immediate danger. When violent winds made the cabin groan and creak, Luna guided them to the cellar, the safest place in the structure. The cubs were growing rapidly, their bodies lengthening, their muscles developing, their coordination improving dramatically each week. Maya could already leap from the floor to the kitchen counter in a single fluid motion, her powerful hind legs propelling her upward with impressive force. Sierra had developed an uncanny ability to move in complete silence. Sarah was often startled to turn around and find the lynx sitting there, watching without having made a single sound as she approached. They were young predators, but they were predators nonetheless, and their wild instincts grew stronger with each passing day. Sarah knew she needed to start thinking about the future. The puppies couldn't stay in the cabin forever. They were wild animals, not pets. They needed space, territory, the freedom to be what nature intended them to be. But every time she thought about separating them from Luna, her heart ached.
How do you take puppies away from their mother? How do you explain to a dog who has spent months nursing, protecting, teaching, and loving these wild creatures that now they have to go? Sarah had no answers, so she postponed the decision, telling herself she would wait a few more weeks, just a little more time, just until she was sure the puppies were ready.
February brought a crucial change. The lynx cubs were now almost 4 months old, and Sarah could no longer ignore the approaching reality. Maya and Sierra had grown tremendously, each weighing around 5 kilograms, with enormous paws that promised impressive adult sizes. Their sharp teeth and retractable claws were genuine hunting tools now, no longer the harmless cub versions. Sarah had watched Maya kill a squirrel that had invaded the cabin with a precision that was both beautiful and disturbing. The bite to the neck was quick, clean, efficient. It was time to accept that these were no longer helpless babies. Sarah made the call she had been putting off. She contacted the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a specialist facility located about 2 hours away. She explained the situation: 2 young bobcats raised by a domestic dog, healthy and demonstrating appropriate hunting instincts, but too socialized with humans and a canine to simply be released into the wild without preparation. The center's director, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, listened to the story with a professional skepticism that gradually turned into genuine fascination. Dr. Chen came in person to assess the cubs a week later. Sarah greeted her at the door, nervous in ways she couldn't quite name. Luna sensed the tension immediately, positioning herself protectively between the stranger and the lynx cubs exploring the living room. Maya, ever brave, approached to investigate the newcomer, while Sierra cautiously watched from atop her favorite bookcase. Dr. Chen spent nearly 3 hours observing the interactions, taking notes, snapping photographs, and occasionally asking questions that Sarah answered as best she could. The verdict was complex. The cubs were healthy, well-nourished, and demonstrated appropriate hunting reflexes. But there were complications. They lacked sufficient fear of humans, a serious problem for animals that would need to avoid people in the wild. They had formed a deep bond with a species they should naturally view as a potential threat, or at the very least with suspicion. And even more problematic, they had never interacted with other lynxes, never learned the social dynamics of their own species, never understood that they were wild cats and not part of a strange canine pack. Dr. Chen proposed a gradual transition plan. The cubs would be transferred to the center, where they would undergo a multi-stage rewilding process. First, a smaller enclosure where they would adapt to the new environment. Then, careful introduction to other young lynxes through dividing fences, allowing visual and olfactory contact without direct confrontation. Eventually, if all went well, full integration into a lynx group in a large, multi-acre naturalized habitat. The ultimate goal would be release into protected territory when they reached maturity, probably at 1.5 years of age. Sarah agreed to the plan, knowing it was the right one, but feeling as if she were betraying Luna in some fundamental way. The transfer date was set for 3 weeks later, enough time for Sarah to begin psychologically preparing herself, and, in some way, Luna, for what was to come. But how do you prepare a mother to lose her daughters? How do you explain the inexplicable? Sarah began increasing the time the puppies spent out of Luna's immediate presence, taking them to the fenced-in outdoor enclosure she had built behind the cabin while Luna remained inside. The separations were painful to watch. Luna stood by the glass door, her snout pressed against the glass, observing every move of the pups outside. She whimpered softly, her tail occasionally wagging when she saw something that made her proud. Maya climbing the tree in the enclosure with spectacular skill. Sierra chasing and catching a bird that made the mistake of landing too close. But mostly Luna just watched with such palpable sadness that Sarah had to look away. The pups reacted to the separations in different ways, as always. Maya accepted it relatively well, distracted by new adventures and opportunities for exploration. Sierra protested more, meowing toward the door where Luna waited, clearly preferring to be near her adoptive mother. The nights had become even more precious.
Sarah allowed them all to stay together after sunset, knowing that these moments were precious. Luna lay near the fireplace, and the two lynxes snuggled against her as they always did. But there was a different quality now, more urgent, more intense, as if all three sensed that something was changing. Luna groomed them for longer periods, her tongue repeatedly tracing the same spots, as if trying to memorize every texture, every scent. Maya purred louder than usual, a sound that vibrated through the silent room. Sierra stayed awake even after the others fell asleep, her amber-green eyes reflecting the firelight, observing everything with an intensity that broke Sarah's heart.
The day of the transfer arrived faster than Sarah had prepared for it. It was a March morning, with the sun finally showing signs that the brutal winter was beginning to recede. Dr. Chen and his team arrived early, bringing 2 specialized transport crates, larger and more reinforced than Sarah had anticipated, brutally reminding her that Maya and Sierra were no longer the tiny, helpless babies she had found in that rocky cavity 4 months ago. They were young predators now, strong enough to cause serious harm if they panicked or felt threatened during transport. Luna knew. Sarah had no idea how, but the dog absolutely knew something terrible was about to happen. From the moment the center's vehicle appeared at the cabin entrance, Luna stayed glued to the lynx cubs, her body positioned between them and the strangers entering. Her fur wasn't bristling in aggression, but her whole body was tense with a protective vigilance that clearly communicated her disapproval of what was happening. When Dr. Chen tried to approach the cubs, Luna stepped forward and let out a low growl, the first truly aggressive sound Sarah had ever heard from her in 5 years of living together. Sarah had to be the one to capture the cubs. It was the only way. She started with Maya, luring her with her favorite toy, a feathered rope that the lynx loved to attack. Maya followed her to the outdoor enclosure, where the team had positioned the first transport crate with the door open and fresh food inside. For a moment, it seemed that Maya would enter willingly, her natural curiosity overcoming her caution. But then Luna appeared in the doorway of the enclosure, and Maya stopped abruptly, looking back towards the dog as if asking permission or perhaps reassurance that she was safe. Luna gave them neither. Instead, she approached Maya and gently took the young lynx by the scruff of the neck, exactly as she had done dozens of times before when the cubs were smaller. But this time, instead of carrying her to safety, Luna carried her away from the transport crate, back toward the cabin. The message was unmistakable. No, you're not going. You stay here. You're mine. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes as she watched that golden retriever refuse to accept what needed to happen. Dr. Chen and his team waited in respectful silence, clearly moved by what they were witnessing. It took 45 minutes of gentle coaxing, careful redirection, and finally Sarah's gentle physical restraint of Luna to get Maya into the transport crate. The young lynx didn't fight much. She trusted humans, which was part of the problem. But her cries when the door closed were pure betrayal. Luna desperately tried to reach the crate, fighting against Sarah's embrace with a strength she rarely displayed. Her bark echoed through the mountains, a sound of anguish that even made the professional members of the rescue team look away. Sierra was even worse. The most cautious lynx, the one that always observed and thought before acting, completely refused to be lured into the box. She ran up the tallest tree in the enclosure and remained there, her eyes wide with fear, making sounds Sarah had never heard from her before, a mixture of cub meows and adult warning growls. Dr. Chen decided to use a more direct capture technique. With a restraining stick and a specialized net, the team eventually managed to safely bring Sierra to the ground and place her in the second box. But the process was traumatic for everyone involved, especially for Luna, who watched helplessly as her most timid daughter was captured by strangers. When both crates were loaded into the vehicle, Luna did something that completely broke Sarah's heart. The dog ran to the vehicle and tried to climb onto it, her barks turning into whimpers, her paws scratching at the back door where the crates were secured. She wasn't being aggressive, she was begging. She was pleading in the only way she knew how not to have her daughters taken away. Sarah had to physically carry her away from the vehicle, her arms encircling the dog's large, trembling body as the vehicle slowly drove away down the dirt road. Luna broke free from Sarah's grip the moment she could and ran after the vehicle. She chased for almost a kilometer, her paws pounding on the frozen ground, her bark growing hoarser and more desperate with each passing second. Sarah ran after her, calling her name, but Luna wouldn't stop, wouldn't give up, wouldn't accept that her daughters were leaving. It was only when she physically could no longer run, when her legs gave out and she fell, panting and trembling at the edge of the mountain road, that Sarah finally caught up with her. The dog lay there, looking in the direction the vehicle had disappeared, making mournful sounds that Sarah would carry in her nightmares for months afterward. The following days were the darkest Sarah had ever witnessed. Luna refused to eat, ignoring even her favorite foods that Sarah prepared with growing care and desperation. The dog spent hours in the empty outdoor enclosure, lying exactly where the puppies used to sleep in the afternoon sun, her snout pressed against the ground as if she could somehow sniff out a trail that would bring them back. She constantly checked the cooler inside the now empty and cold cabin, nudging the blankets with her nose as if hoping to find two small, speckled bodies hidden there. Sarah called the center daily, desperate for updates. Dr. Chen reported that the transition was proving more difficult than expected. Maya had adapted relatively well to her new enclosure, exploring every corner with her characteristic curiosity, but refused to eat properly and spent long periods staring in the direction of the road she had arrived by. Sierra was worse off. She hid in a corner of the enclosure, only emerging at night when she was sure no humans were watching. She had lost weight, her fur was losing its shine, and her eyes held a sadness that the center staff described as almost human in its depth. 2 weeks dragged on like years. Luna finally started eating again, but only the bare minimum to survive. She had lost almost 4 kilos, her ribs now visible beneath her golden fur, which seemed to have lost its luster. Sarah took her for daily walks, trying to re-establish her old routines. But Luna walked like an automaton, without joy or interest in the world around her. She no longer chased squirrels, investigated interesting scents, or displayed any of the behaviors that had once defined her vibrant personality. It was as if an essential part of her had been ripped away, leaving only a shell functioning purely on survival instinct. It was Dr. Chen who called with the proposal that would change everything. She admitted that the separation was harming all 3 in ways the team hadn't anticipated. Maya and Sierra weren't adapting to the standard rehabilitation protocol. They refused interaction with other lynxes, showed increasing signs of depression, and their hunting instincts were deteriorating instead of improving. Dr. Chen had consulted with animal behavior specialists from 3 different universities, and they all agreed on something radical: allowing a visit. A supervised reunion between Luna and the cubs to assess whether the connection remained strong or if time and distance had begun the natural process of separation. Sarah and Luna made the 2-hour trip in a heavy silence. Luna slept most of the way, exhausted from constant stress and lack of proper food. But when the vehicle turned at the entrance to the rehabilitation center, the dog woke abruptly. Her whole body tensed, her nostrils flared, and she began making low, anxious sounds that Sarah recognized, the same sounds Luna made when she heard her puppies meowing as babies. Somehow, through miles of distance and weeks of separation, Luna knew. She knew her daughters were near. Dr. Chen greeted them with a cautiously hopeful expression. She explained that she had prepared a neutral area, a large outdoor enclosure that none of the lynxes had used before, eliminating territorial issues. The cubs would be brought in first, allowing them to explore and feel safe in the space. Then Luna would be introduced through a secondary gate, and they would observe what happened from an elevated observation platform. There were established safety protocols. Young lynxes were still predators, and if they didn't recognize Luna or reacted with territorial aggression, the team would intervene immediately. Sarah and Dr. Chen watched from the platform as Maya and Sierra were carefully transferred to the reunion enclosure. The two lynxes, now visibly larger and thinner than Sarah remembered, entered cautiously. Maya sniffed the perimeter with minimal interest, while Sierra immediately found a high point and sat down, observing everything with her characteristic vigilance. They appeared physically healthy, but there was something dull in their movements, a lack of vitality that clearly communicated they were not thriving. Then the secondary gate opened, and Luna entered the enclosure. For 3 interminable seconds, no one moved. The two lynxes stood completely still, their bodies tense, their ears pointed forward. Luna stopped just inside the gate, her tail motionless, all her senses focused on the 2 spotted shapes about 20 meters away. And then Sierra made a sound. That specific meow she used to make when she was a baby and needed Luna. It was a sound that shouldn't still exist in the throat of a 5-month-old lynx, but there it was, clear and desperate and unmistakable. Luna ran. She crossed those 20 meters in 3 seconds, and both lynxes rushed to meet her halfway. What happened next was something Sarah filmed with trembling hands, knowing no one would believe it without visual evidence. Maya and Sierra leaped at Luna simultaneously, their bodies colliding with the dog with enough force to knock her down. The 3 fell into a messy pile of black, golden, and spotted fur. Luna was frantically licking both pups, checking every inch of them as if searching for injuries. Maya was making that chirping sound she made when she was incredibly happy, rubbing her face against Luna's repeatedly. Sierra was purring so loudly that Sarah could hear her from the observation platform 10 meters away, her whole body vibrating with the intensity of the sound. They stayed like that for 20 minutes, just touching each other, smelling each other, reassuring each other that they were all real and whole and together again. Dr. Chen was openly crying, her hand covering her mouth as she watched. 2 members of her team were recording from different angles, documenting something that defied decades of established understanding of interspecies bonds. Sarah simply watched through her own tears, witnessing love in its purest and most impossible form. A family reunited against all odds, proving that some bonds are too strong to be broken by time, distance, or the supposed laws of nature. What happened in that reunion enclosure changed the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Rehabilitation Center's protocol forever. Dr. Chan and his team, after days of deliberation and consultation with animal behavior experts from across the country, made an unprecedented decision. Maya and Sierra would not be forced through the standard rewilding process. Instead, the center would create an experimental pilot program, the first of its kind, that recognized and respected the interspecies bond that had formed. The bobcat cubs needed to return to the wild. That was non-negotiable. But perhaps there was a way to do that without completely destroying the family they knew. The plan was complex but brilliant in its simplicity. Sarah agreed to temporarily move into a research cabin adjacent to the center, bringing Luna with her. For the next 6 months, Maya and Sierra would live in a massive 15-acre semi-wild habitat, large enough to develop territories, hunt live prey, and learn genuine survival skills. But every 3 days, Luna would have supervised access to an interaction area at the edge of that habitat. The cubs could choose whether or not to approach. No one would be forced. It would be entirely voluntary, allowing the young lynxes to maintain their connection with their adoptive mother while simultaneously becoming the wild predators they needed to be. The first few months were revealing. Maya and Sierra always came for visits, but the nature of their interactions gradually changed. At first, they acted exactly as they had when they were cubs, jumping on Luna, seeking to be groomed, sleeping pressed against her warm body. But as they grew and their wild instincts strengthened, the visits became shorter and more like encounters between equals than between mother and daughters. They greeted Luna with genuine affection, spent time together, and then returned to their lives in the larger habitat. They were learning to be independent while maintaining a connection that clearly meant something profound to all 3. Luna had changed too. She started eating normally again, her weight returned, the shine returned to her golden fur. But she was no longer just the grieving mother who had found purpose in orphaned cubs. She had become something more complex, a bridge between worlds, a teacher who understood both love and letting go. During visits, Sarah watched Luna teach her cubs her final lessons. When Maya became too trusting with humans, Luna gently nudged her back, communicating that not all humans were safe. When Sierra hesitated to hunt larger prey, Luna observed from afar, offering presence but not interference, allowing the young lynx to develop her own confidence. When Maya and Sierra turned 1 year old, they were fully grown bobcats, magnificent, powerful, and undeniably wild. They weighed about 16 kilograms each, with muscular bodies and eyes that gleamed with the sharp intelligence of top predators. They hunted with deadly efficiency, had established territories within their large habitat, and displayed all the behaviors that indicated readiness for release. The center's team began the release preparation process, fitting them with lightweight tracking collars, selecting suitable protected territory in the mountains, and coordinating with rangers and wildlife biologists. The final visit before their release took place on a September morning, the crisp mountain air carrying the scent of approaching autumn. Sarah brought Luna to the interaction area one last time, knowing this would be their final farewell. The two lynxes arrived together, walking side by side with the fluid grace that now defined their every movement. They greeted Luna with their old rituals, rubbing faces, purring, intertwining bodies in a dance that communicated love without words. Luna groomed them one last time, her tongue tracing the modeled faces she knew so well. Maya accepted the attention for a few minutes before pulling away, ready to move on. Sierra lingered longer, her forehead pressed against Luna's neck, making that low purring sound that was almost a moan. And then they were gone. They simply turned and walked back into the dense forest that was now their true home. They looked back once, both simultaneously, and Luna stood there watching until the last patches of her mottled fur disappeared among the trees. Sarah expected Luna to crumble, that the pain of the final separation would destroy her as it almost had the first time. But Luna simply sat there, calm and dignified, her tail wagging slowly. She wasn't happy, but she was at peace. She had done her job. She had saved her daughters, raised them, taught them, and now she had set them free. There was nothing more a mother could do. Maya and Sierra were released into protected territory 3 days later. Tracking collars allowed researchers to monitor their movements during their first year of freedom. Both established healthy territories, hunted successfully, and appropriately avoided human areas. Maya eventually had her own litter of 2 cubs, becoming a mother who hunted with the ferocity she learned from her instincts and cared with the tenderness she learned from a golden retriever. Sierra remained solitary for longer, but was sighted several times in excellent condition, living the independent life that many female lynxes prefer. As for Luna and Sarah, they returned to their mountain cabin when the pilot program ended. Life returned to something resembling normal: morning walks, evening reading by the fireplace, the quiet peace of secluded life at high altitudes. But Luna had a new routine. Once a week, she would hike to a specific rock formation on the edge of Sarah's property, the highest accessible point, and sit there for an hour, gazing out toward the distant mountains where her daughters lived their wild lives. Sarah never interrupted her during these moments. Some bonds, she learned, don't end just because physical proximity ends. Some loves last forever, crossing species, defying logic, proving that family is a choice we make with our hearts, not a sentence we receive from our genes. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel to help me bring you more stories like this, and turn on notifications. Comment on what you thought and leave your tips and suggestions in the comments. There are many more extraordinary stories waiting for you here on the channel. Keep watching and discover more impossible connections that challenge everything we think we know about the natural world.